Welcome to Rural Strong, where we talk real challenges and bold solutions in rural economic development. I'm your host, Joe Barker. Let's get into it. Welcome to Rural Strong. This is your podcast host, Joe Barker, and we're coming to you today from the Southwest Tennessee Development District podcast studio in beautiful downtown Jackson, Tennessee. And we've got a twist to our podcast today, is actually I am going to be interviewed by Chad Chancellor, and I know that's a familiar name to many of you. Chad is one of the most well-known economic development consultants in the nation, and he is co-founder of the Next Move Group and does great work with communities of all sizes. But I'm excited to announce that Chad and myself have joined in a collaboration to bring something new to his organization, and that is I am available through the Next Move Group for local elected official training. I called it Building Local Leadership Capacity. As a former elected official serving 20 years in that capacity, I know how important it is to have proper leadership on the local level. So Chad is going to interview me today. If you're interested in talking about some training, you can contact the Next Move Group, or you can contact me at jwbarkerconsulting@gmail.com. So with that, here's Chad Chancellor.
Hello, movement members. This is Chad Chancellor, co-founder of Next Move Group. This week, we've got Joe Barker with us, and he's going to talk about growing local leadership, which I think all of us can agree is important, from rural communities all the way up to the metro towns. And the ones that seem to grow have some commonalities in leadership, and Joe's going to talk to us about that. One of the reasons we have Joe on here is that our Mardi Gras event, we decided that we wanted to start bringing in experts for our members who had better expertise than we did in certain areas. Joe, we've done a bunch of economic development board trainings, and I think we're as good at that as there is. But when it gets to elected officials, I'm not sure that we're as good at that as there is, which is why I'm pleased to have you with us here today. So, folks, Joe is the executive director of the Southwest Tennessee Development District up in Jackson, Tennessee, and that's a planning and economic development district. He's got about 8 counties under him. Prior to that, he was assistant commissioner of Department of Economic Community Development for the state of Tennessee. And Joe, I believe at one time you served as a city mayor, if I'm correct. So one of the reasons we wanted Joe on here is because he has seen local leadership from every angle, and I think he can help a lot of our members. So, Joe, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you, Chad. And you know, when you mentioned being a city mayor, and also in Tennessee, we have county mayors, and I also had the honor and privilege of serving as a county mayor. So I've actually had the opportunity to see it from the city side and also the county side.
So you were a city mayor too. You were both a city mayor and a county mayor.
I served 2 terms as city mayor in the metropolis of Savannah, Tennessee, and then I served 2 terms as county mayor in Hardin County.
Well, if nobody's been to Savannah, Tennessee, they got a beautiful river that goes through there. So a lot of reasons to go visit. So Joe has been, again, city mayor, county mayor, assistant director of economic development for a state organization, and now he runs a regional development district, which deals a lot with planning and infrastructure and economic development and federal dollars and so forth. So I can think of nobody better at talking about local leadership than Joe. So, Joe, why don't I just ask you, why do you think training local leaders is so important? You know, so you get new mayors, you get new elected officials, and you know, here they are. How do you go about training them, and why is that really important in your opinion?
Well, Chad, you know, I've always looked at local leadership, local organizations, elected officials, and even economic development organizations. You know, the one thing you've got to have is a strong foundation. And leadership, to me, is the key ingredient in that foundation, because everything builds from there. And most of the time, I find out that local councils or local commissions many times take on the personality of the person that's leading that organization. So it's just so critical to have that leader leading the community and actually being able to present that vision and then carry through on achieving the things that they need to do to accomplish their goals.
And when you find they take on the personality of the leader, is that always the mayor or the city manager or county manager or economic developer, or could it be just the council member that's the loudest? Who do you find ends up being the leader, or is there no one answer?
Well, there's probably no one answer, but I do agree with the fact that whoever conducts that meeting, and again, if it's in an economic development organization, if it's the director of that organization, if it's the mayor, and of course, in some instances, it could be the city manager, city administrator, but they set the tone. They set the tone, and many times, as we know, the public is there. And I think it's highly important for the person that's leading that meeting, number one, to be in control, but number two, to understand who they work for. And usually it's the people sitting out there in the chairs.
Yeah. Well, Joe, we've done hundreds of economic development executive searches, and I can now tell before we ever place the person how successful they'll be. Not that they'll get fired or won't have any success at all, but I can tell just by the leadership on the hiring committee and that we deal with. And I don't know how to put my finger on it. Joe, if you said, Chad, right now, I just can tell. I've just done. Certain communities have leadership that just, feels a certain way and others don't. So how important do you think local leadership is to a community's success or failure when it comes to economic development?
Well, it is the most important ingredient. I've worked with communities all my life, Chad. I was elected to the Savannah City Council 50 years ago, and that was where I dipped my toe in public service. And we in Savannah actually have a city manager form of government. And I found out early on that, the relationships between the mayor, the city manager, and the council, we're not always going to agree on things, but I think the main thing is we have to understand what our role is. And our role is to do the best we can for the community that we serve. And that's the reason when I look at leadership, to me, leadership is you don't manage people. You manage your finances. You manage your time. You manage your schedule. You lead people. And I think this is where we get off track sometimes is leaders look on themselves as managers instead of setting the tone for the future of that organization.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we want to work with Joe on, from time to time, we get a call from one of our members that says, can you do some elected officials training for us? And again, we do a lot of economic development board training, and sometimes the elected officials will be mixed in there. But we have not done city council training, county commission training, so to speak. But Joe does have a program where he's tailored it to go in and help communities build that leadership at the local level. So when we get some of those calls, we're probably going to refer Joe and let you talk with him. So Joe, why don't you talk about some of the things you've done and the program you've built to help economic developers find and train their local leaders?
Well, what I've done, Chad, I tell folks I'm not smarter than anybody else, but I've had 50 years now of working with local elected officials, working in local economic and community development. And really, I've learned a lot of things, and I've learned probably a lot more from my failures than I have what successes that I've been involved with. And for a long time, I thought about, wouldn't it be neat if someone who has been there and done that had an opportunity to speak, whether it's with local elected officials, local boards, whoever it might be, about their experiences and about the things that they've learned that possibly could help make them more successful. So I just developed a program that's very interactive, and what I like to do is actually I'm not too much of a webinar guy, is to be there in person, where you get the feedback from the people who are actually attending, and we just talk about those things that make leaders successful. We talk about vision, we talk about creating trust. One of the most important things I think in leadership is communication. And we just talk about various things that I've observed that make communities successful. And hopefully that when those attend leave, that they might take one thought, one ideal, and say, we might could implement this, and it would be good for our community. And if that happens, we've had a really productive session.
Do you do 2 hours or half a day, or can you vary that, or kind of how does that look?
Well, really, Chad, I tailor it to the audience. My standard presentation is a 2-hour presentation, which that includes the question answers, the interaction. But, I know sometimes people have retreats and workshops. They need an hour instead of 2 hours. In fact, in just a few days, I'm speaking at the conference for the Tennessee City Managers Association, and I tailor it to their job. So, what I like to do, if someone is interested in talking to me about a training session, let's talk about, the things that they really want to touch on, the things that they think would be most beneficial to them, and we'll tailor it for that and go from there.
And, you can tell from Joe's disposition, he doesn't come across as some know-it-all expert. And I have found elected officials don't really like to be trained by know-it-alls, Joe. I think that your demeanor, one of the things that I hear when I do economic development board trainings is people tell me that they like, my country accent, and you're about as country as I am, Joe, and that I don't come Absolutely. In there, acting like an economist. And I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I see that in you. And I can see where you could get elected officials' attention without coming across as some know-it-all commandeering personality. You know what I mean?
Well, I think what we both have, Chad, is we have a passion for what we do. And I absolutely have a passion for working with local elected officials, and because I know what they go through on a daily basis. It's, being a local elected official is one of the most difficult jobs in America, and especially in rural and small towns. They go to church, they go to the grocery store, they go to their local school, and somebody's there to ask them a question or to question a decision that has been made. And but this is how we operate. And as you know, today with social media, it even makes it much more difficult than even 20 years ago to be a local elected official.
Yeah. One of the things when I was an economic developer, I don't think I had an appreciation for how hard, the mayor's job was. And, I may have a prospect have a question, and I just thought the mayor ought to call me right back, and he may be out dealing with a dog that's been run over, because the citizens will call him for anything. I mean, so I think you're right. I don't think I did a good enough job when I was an economic developer, just understanding all the stuff they got through on the mayor and the city manager and the local elected leaders. And I tell you something else, Joe, that happened to me, and I suspect happens to our members, and you probably got thoughts on this. I always got along great with my initial board who hired me and the initial elected officials who were part of hiring me as the economic developer, whether I was in Lawrenceburg or Kentucky or wherever. I got along great with them. A year later, I'd get a pay raise. We just got along great. But the minute that I got new elected officials or new board members who weren't part of hiring me, didn't hear what I said when I interviewed or what, we just started having friction. because I may be wanting to develop this industrial park a certain way and they don't. And, I'd say, well, I literally told y'all that when you interviewed me. Well, they weren't sitting in there and I didn't have much patience back then. I'm getting a little older now. Joe knew me back when I was a young up and comer, but you hit the nail on the head, Joe. I didn't communicate well with them. And when I look back, I see that. So talk about the need to constantly, I guess, communicate, because you may be getting along great with your existing people and then new folks come in and talk about the difficulty in that. And I would think if I were going to do something like this, Joe, I might want to do it every year, because it can go great the first time. Now you got new people. You almost need to do a session every time you get new people.
Well, that's exactly right, Chad. And coming from a local elected official background, sometimes as local elected officials, we don't want to bring someone in for some training because we think we are admitting that we're weak in some way. And that is not it at all. I look on the training that I do just as continuing education, because most of the things I learned when I was a new locally elected officials was from some other elected official that had been in that position for several years. The same thing in economic development. I know when you started, you probably called on people who had been in that position for years. This is how we learn. And in my organization today, my board is comprised of local elected officials. They come and go. And the challenge I have is when you work with local elected officials for maybe 4 or 8 years, not only are they my bosses, but we become friends. Right. And we go to functions together and we go to meetings together. And then lo and behold, they lose an election, and whoever comes in behind them thinks that there was this too friendly relationship between me and the outgoing person. And what I do is a continual job of education and training, because not only do I want to help lead this organization, I think the best way I can do that is to be your friend and understand what you need in your community and how we can plug in and help. And yes, I've got mayors that were on my board 15 years ago. They're lifelong friends now. They're no longer mayors in their position anymore, but we become lifelong friends. So I just think that the number one thing I do when somebody new comes in is I go sit down with them. I introduce myself. My dad was a successful businessman, and I used to ask him, Dad, how did you become so successful? And he said, Joe, I never sold the product. I sold myself. And that's, to me, is what we do, is we talk about if people believe in you, then things go a whole lot smoother.
Yeah, well, you said something I like. You said continuing education, because I have dealt with elected officials who didn't want to feel trained, because, once you get elected, now you're supposed to know everything. It's just the way it works, But I like how you
Chad, us local elected officials, we're alpha males or females, and right. We got to be in charge, and that is part of leadership. But I want those that watch this video to know that there's nothing threatening about this at all. It's just how can we do our job better, and maybe I can learn from where Joe has been for the last 5 decades.
It's kind of like having a mentor. I mean, if you're elected mayor and you've never been one, I have mentors with what I do, and I think I like that. But I got a few more questions for you. Before I do, I want you to talk about, Joe has a podcast called Rural Strong, and I know some people will drop off as they watch the video and get busy and won't watch it all. So before we get to the end, I want to plug it here. Joe, talk about your podcast and what you're doing. Seems like you send out a new episode every Monday, if I've got that right.
That's correct, Chad. Back about a year ago, in our organization, we were talking one day about what we can do to maximize the opportunities in rural areas. And most of this country is rural. And so I got with a firm and talked to them about doing a podcast. And so last June, we began a podcast called Rural Strong, and you can access Rural Strong on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And you're right, we try to every Monday drop a new podcast. And these are guests from all across the nation. And they talk about really things that they've been involved with that has helped make their rural community successful. So I would hope you would look up Rural Strong, and there's a whole library there. I think we're dropping our 40-something podcast this next Monday. And so Chad has been one of our guests, and we've just had some interesting folks from all across the country. They really talked about things that certainly I'd never thought of, and I wish I had heard 25 years ago. So Rural Strong is the podcast.
I drive to Mississippi to see my dad's got late stage Alzheimer's. So about every 2 weeks I go up there and sit with him. And so I listen to yours back to back as I'm on my way. So, but I do have a few more questions when it comes to local leadership before we hang up. Have you found basic principles that are common in all successful local leaders?
I'm a big sports guy. And sometimes I watch teams that I think on paper have a lot of talent, but they never win the championship. And then you see other teams that are definitely a team, and then you look at their coach or their leader, and how did all this happen? And I think, yes, and this is one of the things we talk about in the trading, but we talk about creating that vision, not for what your community is today, but what that community can be in the future. And then the key, Chad, is being able to translate that vision to the employees you work with, to the other local elected officials, but more importantly, to the community. So you have to have that vision. The other thing I know that is highly important that I think all successful leaders have is they create a trust. If I don't trust the person that's working next to me, then we're probably not going to be very productive. So you've got to trust that leader. You've got to trust your fellow employees. And I think there's a process that you go through to help develop that trust. And then I mentioned communication. In my life, when I've had difficulties, and it may have been at home, it may have been in business or wherever it was, it's probably because I didn't communicate with someone. And I think this is in our organizations is we've got to communicate with people, and we've also got to have a communication plan. And that even goes to returning phone calls, returning texts. When you write an email, do you really want to send that email, or do you want to think about it a while? So I just think that there's common things that run through leaders. People think that the most successful leaders are the most vocal, and some of the quietest leaders have been the most successful. I think of people like John Wooden at UCLA, and people like that. Their demeanor, you couldn't tell if they were winning or losing, but they were great leaders.
Well, how important are defined roles in effective local governance, in your opinion? That's especially in small towns. I see that sometimes everybody doesn't really have a sense of what their defined role is.
Well, it is so important, Chad. There's a phrase that people use today. It's called stay in your own lane. And I think when we get to talking about local government, sometimes what we see is, and I see it every day in our communities, the council person wants to take on the mayor's role.
Yeah.
The mayor wants to run the council. Okay. And when all that gets involved and intertwined, then you've got problems. And so we talk a lot about, knowing what your role is, because, as a mayor, I understood, Chad, I was only going to be as good as what that council would allow me to do because they control the purse strings. So we all have to work together and we have to stay in our own lane and know our defined roles.
The last question I got for you, if you had to sum up what is the role of local elected leadership in economic development, how would you put your finger on that?
Well, Chad, in many rural areas, that local elected official is the lead economic developer, and some of them are very good at it. The danger is local elected officials come and go. But I know from a financial standpoint, sometimes that's the way it has to be. In other instances where a community hires a full-time economic development professional, again, I go back to stay in your own lane. That's what that person is hired for. Now, the local elected official has a vital role, and that's to assist that economic developer. And many times, those local elected officials are the ones that have to close the deal. Whether it's a pilot, a TIF, or whatever it is, they have to come together to make the package where you can close the deal. So there is a relationship there that if people, again, know their roles, can be very successful.
Yeah. Well, Joe, thank you for visiting with us today. To any of our members, if you think that this program would be interesting, growing local leadership, reach out to me or Joe. You may give them your contact information. And this is one of the things that we're going to spotlight every few months through the next year. Because to me, this is where I really see economic developers struggle and get frustrated and stressed. And so if there's a way that by bringing Joe in, we can help you, we want to do that. So either contact me if you'd like to visit with Joe about coming in and doing a session, or Joe, give them your contact information.
Well, I just give you my cell phone number, and that's the easiest way to contact me. It's 731-607-5616, or my email. And I've got a consulting firm that I do this leadership training out of, and it is jwbarkerconsulting@gmail.com.
And what is the name of your program? Because it's not training elected officials. They may not like that. So tell the folks again what you call it, because I think it's pretty smart.
Well, actually, I've got two names for it, Chad. One is Building Local Leadership Capacity, and then I've sort of transitioned into leadership in uncertain times. And we certainly live in uncertain times right now, and leadership has never been more important.
Awesome. Well, Joe, thank you for being with us. For our members, Joe is a member of the movement. His organization is, so we're proud to have him there. And for our other members, we're going to probably not only put this video out, but about once a quarter, we're going to have content to help you with elected officials. And because I really think this is a way we can help our members. So, Joe, thank you for being with us, and I'll give you the last word.
Well, thank you, Chad, and I appreciate the Next Move group for all you do across the country and particularly for our rural areas. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Rural Strong. If you found this helpful, share it and follow the show for more insights from rural leaders making a real difference. Until next time, stay rural strong.